join in as we get going. But just to kind of start us off, I'm Michael McClendon. I'm the executive director of health and wellness. I've been around the university for about 10 years now. Worked in the counseling center the entirety of that time here, and currently serve both as the executive director of. Whew, it is 8 o'clock. Executive director of health and wellness, but also acting as the director of the counseling center, which is pretty much the role that I'm here in tonight. As we have worked to try to support through a variety of different ways the kind of student experience ongoing through this semester, one of the things that became very clear was that because spring break is delayed in this semester, um, while that was a decision that was made so that if people chose to travel on spring break when they came back, we could just be remote without being in classes and not necessarily jeopardize kind of a spread of potential more COVID cases on campus. It made some sense there, but what it's done is it's increased stress, increased distress across campus, not just for students, but for faculty and staff as well. So we're trying to do several different pieces of programming throughout this week to really just try to provide some tools and resources to everybody. So the point of tonight is to talk about what kind of constitutes mental health in a way. Like we're not going this is not psycho 101 psych 101. I'm not going to dive into like psychology, but really more like how do you actually go about achieving balanced health? What does that look like? How do you know when it's not there? And if you're starting to recognize that, or even if you're not recognizing it, what do you do about it? Also, shout out to Caitlin Fell, and I'm about to get to the other introductions, but Caitlin Fell is serving as co-host and started the recording for me, which thank you very much because I knew I'd forget. So we're recording this not to be weird about it, but because we actually want to use this content and make it available to anybody and everybody that can't be here tonight. So it's going to land on our webpage at some point later down the road, maybe in a week or so. Also joining me, Ellery Brubaker, who is one of our staff counselors, Mary Kennedy, who is our current pre-doctoral intern counselor, and then Brooke, I'm going to butcher your last name, but I'm going to try it. Palinin, who sort of, who is who also does some counseling for us, but serves as our GA, our graduate assistant, or one of our graduate assistants. So they're here helping me answer any kind of questions that come up in the chat. And also, we had a plan for doing various breakout rooms, but I think if we stay at this number, I think we may be able to have the discussion that we want kind of just within this space. But when we get to that, I'll tell you what that looks like. So, without further ado, I'm going to jump into. I do have PowerPoints, but I promise they're not like text heavy or word heavy. At least most of them. I'm just using them as kind of visual anchors for the things that we're talking about. So, in general, we want to talk about. We know that everybody's feeling the pressure of all that's going on. Want to talk a little bit and give a little bit of a formulation of how to wrap our heads around what happens when we're feeling that press or feeling kind of distressed or like stressed out to the point. Like, what does that mean? And generally, there's a couple of different models that are out there. There's more than a couple, but there's a couple that we like. This one, that's kind of this pie chart, is one that I've used for years. Um, it really is just meant to be a visual representation of what might constitute one's life. Those different pie pieces are the various domains that you can have in your life, the various types of experiences, interactions, activities, what have you in your life. Now, they're equally distributed in this graph. However, that's not really how life works, and it's not meant to be an exact representation. It's not suggesting that you should be equally distributed. In fact, you should decide what is in there and whether or not these six actually apply to you and how big a piece of the pie they get. And one of the things that we talk about is that depending upon how big a piece of the pie that is, and then depending upon how big it actually starts to consume. So, for instance, usually when I present this to students, I start talking about like when you get to college or when you're in a semester, It might be that your interpersonal and or maybe even your physical, right? Like maybe you're really into group fitness and you're all about getting together in like a CrossFit or an Orange Theory or some kind of yoga class or something like this. And this is a big component of who you are and what constitutes your social interactions and kind of your life away from school. And when you're back in the semester, that academic piece of the pie is going to expand because it starts to eat up more of your schedule than maybe what you normally would have. And so things start to get squeezed. And some, like for the most part, usually we all kind of balance that. We experience the squeeze from other things. We adjust to that. We kind of are flexible to that, and then we move back to it and kind of bounce back. But the problem is when we're in a situation where we have multiple different components that are starting to eat in on some of these other pie pieces that we often use as kind of the resources to bounce back from the stress. And when we start to feel an overwhelming amount of the pressures and not enough of the other things that balance or to feel like it's imbalanced, right? Like that we can't maintain that status quo. Another way of looking at it is through this self-care rating scale. Now, this is a rating scale that we have on our website. I'm going to reference the video that we have that walks you through exactly how to use this rating scale. Dr. Kirsten Robertson, who was one of our former staff members, did a video for us and walked through like exactly how to use this form. But in general, this kind of presents basically the same thing, right? Like you have all these different areas of your life, and you want to be able to look at them and rate where are they and are you satisfied with that. So for instance, your interactional, you may really feel like interactionally you really just wanted it about a 3, right? Like you got a small group of people, you have your supports, you interact with them in a way that feels comfortable to you and that feels rewarding, so you really wanted it a 3. But that maybe your nutritional needs to be at a 5. Like maybe you have some needs around that or some experiences around that. And perhaps right now on campus or off campus, depending upon travel situations or what supply chains look like right now in the midst of this pandemic, you may not be able to get all those nutritional needs and it may be at a 2 or a 3, and that's distressing to you. So it helps to kind of rate these things and then identify what's going on with those ratings, how satisfied you are with those, and what might you be able to do, if anything, or what's part of that context and help define it. The importance of these types of models is is more than just academic. It's more than just kind of seeing something and being like, ah, yes, I understand in this like really intellectualized way. The more that we understand what our stress is and where it's coming from and can formulate and wrap our heads around it, the more that we can actually strategize to address it. And if we don't understand it, if we don't understand the genesis of where it's coming from, or that what the fancy word in scientific language is etiology of where that develops, if we don't understand that, then we don't really know how to unravel that and get and kind of get ourselves propelled down the road to a place that feels more balanced, right? So it's important to have a good model or a good understanding. You don't have to use these 2 models. These are just 2 of the ones that we like in the counseling center because we feel like they're easy to understand and wrap our heads around. They're easy to kind of talk through in these types of environments. There's plenty more out there, okay? The other thing is a lot of people will talk to us and say, well, I just need to get rid of stress. If I could just like have a break from stress, everything would be great. Kind of, not really. So there at this point there's probably over 100 years of research that's gone into understanding stress and the interaction of stress with human development and human performance and human functioning. And at this point, what we understand is that there is an optimal zone of performance that depends upon having an optimal amount of stress within that. So you've probably experienced this, whether it be through like student organization or something that you're involved in, or a class that challenges you and really kind of prompts you to dig in and makes you really thirsty for knowledge and trying to like figure out and understand that and really energizes you in that way, but is also challenging, right? Like that makes you work harder in that certain environment versus one that feels so intense and so overladen and so over your head that it just makes you shut down, or vice versa, one that is so easy and like a softball thrown in that you don't even have to try to get through the course, you're not going to perform well, right? Like it just, these things end up making it so that you end up performing at about the same level. So there's a couple things about this graph that I also like to point out. One, there are no numbers. That's really important because this has to be mapped to each individual in a very idiosyncratic way. That optimal zone for you is not the same as optimal zone for me. And that has a lot of different factors that go into it. And so it can't be a comparison across people to everybody, and recognizing that there's a specific, they didn't say it has to be in this specific thing rated by this specific scale in this test that you take to see just exactly how stressed out you are. And if that's the case, you're outside the optimal zone. That's not the way it works. It's really about kind of knowing yourself and knowing what's going on. Again, going back to the models that we just talked about, well, not really there, but like there, the models that we just talked about it's important to have those models so that you can really do that understanding of kind of where you are. And we're going to get more into that. So, one, you have to know yourself in order to apply this. Two, it is rounded. It is neither a flat top or a point. It's not a flat top because it's not something that you achieve. It's not a plateau that you get to and then that's where you rest and that's where you stay. It is rounded because it is a zone that has fluctuations in it, so that it is not a peak, that it is also not a point. There is not a precise, specific point, balancing point that you get to that is the single state, static position of nirvana. And I am in no way saying anything about Buddhist faith or religion, or disparaging against the concept of nirvana. What I'm saying is that as Americans often, or as those who are studying in America, we are often within a culture that perceives that if we could just get everything right, this perfectionistic mindset, that we would be at that point that would be this perfect balance and we could maintain that and everything would be just right. And that's not the way it works. In fact, you'll notice that the optimal zone both has sloping down and up, right? Like it's a rolling top, which means that it has good and bad in there, which means that even in that optimal zone, there are still moments when the stress feels like it's winning a little bit over the productivity or the performance. And that's important because it's a zone of performance that doesn't necessarily mean performance is above stress at all times. Okay. So we understand that we have to have some stress. We also understand that if we have too much or too little, we're not going to do well. And right now we're talking about a situation where there generally is a good consensus that there's too much, right? The stressors that we are encountering in our everyday life right now within a pandemic, the fact that we're doing this in this methodology instead of in a building across from where my office is over in the student union, which is normally where we would do this, or upstairs in the third floor of Hardesty Hall in the multi-purpose room, which is normally where we would host workshops in person, where we could see your hopefully smiling faces. Like, that is not possible because of the extra layer of stress that we know everybody already has. So we presume at this point that most people are already outside of their optimal level of stress functioning, right? Which means that the models of like a healthy lifestyle and balance, or like the all the things that go into that and how to maintain that, we presume that there are some variations and fluctuations in there that are not in the best place to actually have you feeling as though everything's going swimmingly. Like, most everybody is experiencing some strife around this, right? Even the good silver linings that have come out of this they still come at a cost, right? So what is that cost? How do you know whether or not you're experiencing something? This is I promised that it wouldn't be text heavy. This is the only one that is. This is a long list of quote unquote symptoms or experiences that would anchor what it might look like when your stress gets out of whack. So there's there's things from sad and anxious and irritable down to forgetful, indecisive, boredom, nightmares. So it goes from like emotional to cognitive to behavioral to interpersonal. There's all different kinds of stuff, like even bodily senses, headaches, stomach aches, muscle aches, and tension, right? All of these things can be indicators that something is out of whack in a way that needs to be attended to. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to have all of these. That doesn't mean that you're only going to have one. It really doesn't even mean that these would even necessarily be yours. Somebody might be experiencing something completely different that I left off. It's not a comprehensive list, but it is a fairly thorough one. And what I would say is if you tend to, so a lot of people will go through kind of cycles, right? So if you tend to like get to this point in an academic semester and you're kind of like irritable and grouchy and like, I just want to like, I just need a break, right? Well, then if you're experiencing that right that now, that may not be like a red flag per se. But if you're experiencing that and now all of a sudden you're not sleeping well and you're having weird nightmares or just like really weird dreams, or perhaps you're like not getting along with your significant other, or you find that suddenly you're procrastinating on everything and avoiding everything like the plague, and that's in the plague in the plague, that's like something that you don't tend to do, those would be the red flags that we would say you need to pay attention to. Now, that doesn't mean that, oh my gosh, everything's falling apart. What that means is I need to pay attention to this and attend to what is going on. What is causing that? Again, go back to that model. What part of my pie is getting squeezed out that I need to reattend to? What part of my rating scale feels like it's really off kilter in a way that I need to address to return to balance? So at this point, when I'm talking to someone, typically in the last decade that I've been doing counseling on this campus, I get to this point in an individual conversation. They're like, okay, great, doc. Now what? Like, how do I fix this? The fix is not rocket science, and most everybody knows what the fix is. You got to sleep more. You got to pay attention to nutrition. You got to drink more water. You've heard this. Your parents or your loved ones, your caretakers, at least your best friends or your sisters, your brothers, whoever. People have been, if it wasn't them, it was commercials, have been telling you this for years. This is out there. We all know this. You also know that if you have those things, that productivity, that your ability to attend to things, your concentration in terms of, I put RAM on there, so that's hearkening to like computer lingo. So random access memory is what happens in computer. It's the short-term memory that we all have. Your brain functions in the same way. It has a capacity. It can only hold so much, and then it has to either purge out what it just had or put it in your long-term storage banks or your memory, right? And that if you don't have all of these things at the bottom, the nutrition, the sleep, your ability to concentrate and take in new information is diminished, meaning you can't learn as well, right? Which is a big problem when you're on a university campus. If you have something that really is greatly affecting your ability to learn, well, that's super problematic in the middle of an academic semester. And then balance, right? It's hard to have it's hard to approach balance in any of the other domains if you're not sleeping well, if you're not like eating well, and if you're not hydrating well. Like your system does not function well without those three factors so that it can do any of the rest of these things, right? We know that. And so we know that we have to attend to those things. The problem is, and where I hope this time that you're going to spend with us really pays off, is the application of this knowledge. This knowledge isn't groundbreaking, and it isn't something that you've never heard before. But maybe you haven't had the opportunity to really process, like, why do I have these barriers? What is it that gets in the way of me actually applying these things? Because that in and of itself, that's the sweet spot of trying to change this system, is recognizing what hangs me up, right? What are my barriers? What is it that zaps my motivation? What is it that I need, or what is it that I feel that I need to really give it that extra like college try and oomph to push through? And then to talk about it, once I identify those, what actually is a plan for success? So we weren't sure how many people were going to show up. So we had intended to kind of break out. That's why it's called breakout sessions. So instead of breaking out, perhaps you don't have to, but if you felt so bold as to turn your cameras on and unmute yourself and participate in the conversation, we would invite you to do that. There's no pressure. Or to throw into the chat your ideas or your thoughts, and we can act as a group, the five of us, and kind of spitball these things and talk these through. But we would like to get some form of participation from you to hear kind of what do you feel like are, let's start with the barriers. Like what are the things that get in the way of you being able to put into practice some of these things that are kind of colloquially well known? Not everybody at once. Depressive symptoms, yes. So that's good, right? So like if your stress response is kind of a collapsing inward. So we talk about depressive symptoms, I think it's helpful to really demystify that language. Like depression really is like the kind of internal collapse of like there's just an emptiness. There's kind of like a void. It's not like I'm gloomy or like dark or like even like necessarily sad so much as like empty and like numb, and it feels hard to like push through that sometimes. Or I just want to like I get to that point, I recognize it, and now I want to escape. I don't want to move into that. So that's really good in terms of like a barrier, because that's a hard one to overcome. I'm going to start off, but I'm going to also invite my fellow co-hosts to kind of jump in with me if they have other things to add into this conversation. There's no silver bullet, so I'm not going to like magically fix lives and say, here's the fix to depression, because if that were the case, they would have me in a bottle in the Smithsonian. But the what I think one of the things that I would recommend is that you have to change your perspective away from that there is a fix or that it's all going to get better, and it's celebrating the incremental ability to do something, right? So I've been in conversations where it's like if you got out of bed today and like that's where you're at, great, you did it. What's the next step, right? Um, I hate to be the like that dad that has young kids, but it makes me think of Frozen 2, like the next not right thing, but the next thing, like taking that next step, like what's that next step out of the sadness, right? It's not about I'm going to take this gigantic leap and get out of my depression. It's like I'm just going to take a shower, right? Like I'm just going to take that next step, right? Um, Everybody help me on some of the because the chat's blowing by
Yeah, I
me.
noticed someone else said like time management is another barrier.
Mm-hmm. I wonder. So was that Aziz?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I think it was. So I wonder, Aziz, if you can throw in the chat, like, are there specific? Can you be more specific about time management? Because that's a big, broad topic. So I wonder, like, what is it about time management? But I like that one because time management comes up a lot.
People were also talking about how, like, with time management, like YouTube and things like that, that grab our
Mm.
attention, where it's also like they just keep, like, the videos just keep going,
Oh
where it's like
yeah,
you'll just be sitting there and then
autoplay.
hours go by and you're like,
I know.
dang it.
Or like I like mine
TikTok.
is like Reddit. I just like keep like the front page of Reddit is never ending, you know? Like I just keep going. TikTok, Instagram, any of those. So yes, on the places that you can turn autoplay off, that helps, right? Um, Also, so one of the things, external timers are good. So I also when I talk to students about a lot of times when I talk to students, they're like, right, so I'm giving myself a break. So like I'm rewarding myself. I'll study for like an hour and then I'll let myself go watch a movie or watch a show or watch YouTube or check on TikTok or get into social media at that point. And I'll do that and I'll only mean to be there for 15 minutes. And then like 2 hours later, I'm like, oh, I lost all this time. What's the point? Right. And one of the problems is that you're actually not getting a break. So one of the interesting things about it, so I mentioned the RAM, right? There's different ways that you process information. When you are studying, um, unless it's something that I'm not familiar with on this campus, your studying is usually using visual processing centers in your brain, which means that you are taking information in through your eyes, And reading that in, whether that's through a screen, watching a video, or whether that's actually at a text or a book or a piece of paper, you're using your eyes and you're taking in most of your novel or new information in that way. So then when I take a break and I shift to YouTube or something like this, guess what? I'm still using that same part of my brain, which means it's actually not getting a break, which means that at the end of that 15 minutes, I'm more exhausted than I was at the start of that 15 minutes because my brain hasn't actually gotten a break. The break in that is to shift and do something completely different. Go make a sandwich, go take a walk, go make a snack, go fold clothes, go do some dishes, go do some push-ups, do some sit-ups, you're like, great, Michael, tell me whatever other unrealistic fantasy world thing you want me to do. Like talk to a friend on the phone, or even just like play in your own imagination or walk circles around your room. I don't know, like whatever, right? Like go play with a pet, go go talk to another person. This would engage a different part of your mind, and it allows the RAM, that limited capacity of memory of your visual processing centers in your brain, to take that information, store it away, and come back refreshed with a new bandwidth of ability to take in more novel information. And you're not going to feel as tired, and you're not going to find it as hard to return back to the task, because really you're more exhausted than you were to return back to that task. You're not ready to. Knit a sweater. I love that. That was good, Kelsey. I like that. Play cards. Although playing cards, you're still like reading the cards. So you got to, like, it kind of depends on the cards, but like, sure.
Dang it.
Yeah, I mean, that's like something, right? But you want to get away from like reading or like watching anything or visually, any like video games, still visually processing. So you don't want to do that. Sorry, Caitlin. Me too. Same. Can't just like turn to a game to do something, right? Okay. So I'm also seeing like having stuff on a to-do list. So to-do lists are great, except that there's a couple of, they're kind of a dual-edged sword. To-do list, one, they can be like this looming thing hanging over you, like this cloud, like, oh, my to-do list, I never get it done. It's always there. Right. It's a to-do list. It's never going to get done. As long as you're a human being that's high achieving, you're always going to have to-do things to do. So you're never going to be done with the to-doing. Right? You have to shift your mindset on that. Set a realistic path for yourself and expectation for that day, right? It can't be that week necessarily. I mean, you can have to-dos and goals and things like that for weeks and months, but like if you're doing an actual to-do list, make it 3 to 5 things for that day, right? It's not a shopping list at Costco. Like it can't have volumes to it. You can't have to like scroll through it like Santa, right? Like you got to be able to look at that thing and know where it is. And then from a standpoint of like, so I talked to a lot of students that are like, well, I have all the best intentions, but I just can't motivate myself to do it. And the problem is Nike was kind of onto something. There is no fix for, like, at some point rubber has to meet the road and you just have to like do it, right? That said, there are some ways that you can set yourself up for success in that. So rather than thinking about like I have to do this project or I have this paper, right? Focus on I need to do the first paragraph, or I need to do the first section of this outline, or I just need to read this one article. Chunk up the things that you're going to do, and then what's also really helpful is external timers. So set like a timer. Like I think this task, I'm going to write this first paragraph. This task should take me 20 minutes. So I'm going to give myself 20 minutes. I'm going to set my phone over there, away from me, and I'm going to set a timer for 20 minutes, go. And I'm going to write. And now I have an external pressure that's both holding me accountable. It's away from my hand, so I can't just flick it off. And it's also like I'm racing myself. I've created a competition with myself, and I want to push, like it makes me kind of psychologically push in that way, like I can get it done. Plus, if you do smaller increments like that, one, those are easier to swallow than like I have. So if I walk in and I'm like, oh, I have 6 hours of studying to do, an hour into it, it's like, well, I have 5 hours of studying to do. I have 4 hours of studying. I can get it done in 2 hours. Like, right, I don't need all this time. Versus I need to get this thing done in 20 minutes. And then if it doesn't take 20 minutes and instead at the end of that 20 minutes, I'm not done with it, I'm like, uh-oh. Right? Like I got to reevaluate. Like now I have a more realistic expectation of my time, Or if I knock it out in 5 minutes, it's like, oh, right? Because inevitably, I've written enough papers to know this, and I've coached enough students through this. Whenever you get done with that big paper that was looming over you, you might pull an all-nighter and like crunch it out and like push it out and get to it. And then when I talk to you the next day, I'll be like, well, how was it? And inevitably, 99% of the time, people look at me and go, well, it wasn't that bad. It wasn't nearly as bad as what I thought it was in my head, because avoidance as a mechanism makes it so that every time I put a task off, I psychologically have to value that decision, and I make that task much harder than what it was. It's called a noxious stimulant response. So whenever I make something into a noxious stimulant, something that turns me away, I want to move away from it. Psychologically, as soon as I move away from it, I intensify exponentially, squared, cubed, whatever the other ones are, to the nth power. I exponentially increase my noxious reactions. So, like my disgust, my fear, my anxiety, my disdain, my hatred for that, I intensify that to justify my decision to turn away. It's how phobias work. It's the basic mechanism of that. And so you have to understand that every time you put something off, you make it harder and harder for yourself to come back. But actually, it's a Jedi mind trick, because it's not harder. You just feel like it is. I almost said pretend, but it's not pretend. It's feeling. But feelings aren't facts. That's really important to remember in life. Okay, what else we got?
I wanted to mention something about the to-do list stuff.
Oh
So
yeah.
when I think about the to-do list thing, I play too many video games, but one of the things that I think about is with like Animal Crossing or Stardew Valley or any of those games like that. If they were to put up the entire list of things that you needed to get done at the beginning of the game, like there's no way you would play that game, right? Like there's absolutely no way.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the same thing with to-do lists. Like in, Animal Crossing, they put up like 5 tasks at a time. And you're like, yeah, I can do 5 tasks. Like I can go get 5 apples and I can go get, 6 oranges, whatever. And then once you check off those 5 tasks, then they put up 5 more tasks. And the same thing with Stardew Valley, like they do that. But that's how, you have to look at kind of your to-do list, is like, you can't expect yourself to write down your entire to-do list for, a month and then be like, yeah, let me just get this done today. So you have to kind of give yourself that leeway as well, because even video games are doing it for you.
That's a
So
great analogy. I mean, as much as I like video games, that's a really great analogy, Caitlin. I could similar, like the same thing happened to me with Zelda Breath of the Wild, right? Like there's what, 900 Korok seeds, these stupid little things you have to find, and they're in the worst little places. And if you think about like that, it's like controller down, no way, I'm not going after 900. But it's like, I'll do 5 of them. There's 5 over here. I'll go do these 5, right? Yeah, that's a really good one. Okay,
Also,
others?
you can put things on your to-do list that you're going to do anyways, or that like help you. Like one of the things
Yeah.
I always put on my to-do list is like make coffee, and it's like I'm going to make
Done.
coffee regardless. So I'm like, great, I made some coffee.
Yeah.
Check. So you can do things on that are, you're going to do anyways, and that kind of help kind of just give you that dopamine hit.
Yep.
And then also put things on there that might take a little bit more time too.
Yeah. The other thing, so stealing Stephanie O'Neill's thunder, who's just stealing Brene Brown's thunder. So rather than like thinking about like the thing that you want to accomplish as like this big overbearing thing that you have to do, like give yourself permission to just start it, right? Like, okay, I want to get into running, so I need to get new running shoes, and I probably need to get like new socks and new shorts and new shirts, and I got to figure out my routes, and I got to download the right app, and I probably should look at, do I need to upgrade my watch, and are my headphones the right thing, and do I have sunglasses that are going to slip on my nose, or I don't know, do I need a hat, do I need a jacket? It's spring. What do I do with the weather? How about you just put on your freaking shoes and go for a jog, right? And they've actually done the thing that you wanted to do. Give yourself permission to start. And I'm speaking to myself because like that's what I do. I've done that 1,000 times. Like just give yourself permission to just do it. Like you don't have to be geared up and be ready. This isn't Mount Kilimanjaro. You don't have to like go through an expedition training exercise. Just go. What else? What did anybody? Did we see anything else in the chat?
No, and I think a number of those could also be kind of leak over into those motivation zaps as well. Because if you have a
Absolutely.
really long to-do list, like that's gonna, I mean, for me at least, that's really a big motivation zap is when I wake up and, there's like, 15, 20 things on the to-do list. And it's like, well, I guess I won't be doing any of that today. And then there goes
Right.
the whole day, so.
Right. Exactly. Well, and the other thing is, so thinking about the plan for change, right? So in the same way that give yourself permission, also recognizing that you want to always plan. So what I tell people, and this comes up a lot when people are trying to do exercise or nutrition, because a lot of times they're like, I'm just going to clean out my pantry and I'm getting all new stuff. And like 3 weeks into it, it's like I'm cheating like a maniac on just like chowing down on a chocolate cake because I've had it with this stuff. Of course you have, because it was too restrictive. And also you didn't plan for the fact that something in life is nothing but curveballs, or what other sports metaphor you want. It's nothing but things you didn't expect that are going to turn your world topsy-turvy, and you're just going to have to react to it, and adjust to it. It's just about adjusting. And if you don't plan for that in your plan, like how am I going to build in resilience through the static that's going to push against me, right? So thinking through, like, at some point I'm not going to be successful, and how am I going to bounce back from that? How am I going to keep going when I feel like I'm not doing well, or I didn't do the thing perfect in that way? Okay, anything else that anybody else can think of? Okay. All right. So thank you all. I appreciate it. Thanks to everybody for the contributions. Hopefully that was somewhat helpful. I want to shift to, so once we've kind of tackled the basic fundamental things, there are some other things after that to consider. So again, going back to understanding where your stress comes from and being able to identify that is super important. And sometimes the stressors that people are encountering are hard to tend to and hard to address, not because they don't know where they're coming from. It's because they are actually bumping up against values and parts of themselves that are really hard to address, or they're hard conversations, or they might mean difficult negotiations or confrontations with family members or friends. It might be like having to say no to someone or put up a boundary. And that's challenging work, regardless of what stage of your life you're in. That is challenging work, that very few people are actually coached through. And so, but it's a gut check moment, and it's going to continue to foster stress and distress until it's addressed. There's not really we can pretend and deny it and avoid it all we want, but we already talked about what avoidance does. So you know the answer to that. And denial will fail at some point. It just is inevitable. So sometimes it helps to write down your values and goals and really examine that. And am I really living within those? Is that's what's not feeling good? Am I in an environment that supports those? Sometimes it does help to look at like the short-term and long-term goals, right? So sometimes I feel super stressed about things that are in my life, and if I step back and go, wait, how does this fit big picture, right? It helps me to rescope and redefine and re-clarify my perspective. And then it's not that stressor goes away, but my experience of that stressor is reduced in its intensity per se. Like it no longer feels life or death because I put it in the broad spectrum of, okay, I want to get this done, or I want to take care of this, but it's not exactly going to derail me from my, like it's not the end all be all to my life. Like this thing does not define me, right? Going back to the first one, being able to confront people and tell them that something's bothering you, or saying no, or setting a limit, or setting a boundary is also really difficult work. It's also something that we tend to avoid. Being able to articulate when something's bothering you at the start, like when it first bothers you, is so much easier than after 6 months when it feels like such an insignificant thing, but you're ready to like rip somebody's head off because like, like, ugh, like I can't stand to even look at them anymore. And like, why? Because like they threw away my spoon. And that's a real example. So like this stuff, it builds up when we don't address it. It's like an itch. It doesn't go away. Um, be flexible. Find flexibility in your life. If you feel like you're kind of rigidly having expectations or standards or holding yourself or other people around you to those expectations, then apply flexibility. However, counter to that, also recognize when you're being too flexible and you're bending over backwards and hurting yourself and putting yourself out and not taking care of your needs and not expressing those needs, right? And then the other thing is, like we said, give yourself a break, but actually a break. And I will add to this as a PS statement to give yourself a break. Self-care is not self-indulgence. Self-care is what you need, not always what you want. What I want is to play video games or to watch YouTube or to play hooky and go to the golf course. But what I need is probably to like clean my house so that that feels better to me, or like have a conversation with my family about how we've got to change some of our patterns, or deal with what kinds of foods I'm eating, or actually get up in the morning and do a workout. Right? Okay. So after all of those, if what you find is that you're in a place where you feel like some of those symptoms that we went over, or some of those markers of like how stress might be affecting you when you're off balance, like feeling pinched in those ways, if you're at a place where your functioning really is at a level that is just not happening, then that's when myself and the rest of the team here come into play, because the counseling center is here for that very specific reason. There's our information there on the screen. Do not hesitate to call us. There's all kinds of like, people say all different kinds of things about all different kinds of offices. The one I hear the most is that you're just going to get put on a wait list. That's not necessarily true. Also, I don't think currently we even have, like, I think we might have a few people waiting, but it's not like a huge wait list. It's kind of a weird semester. But also we work to help provide resources, and we work to help match those. And even if sometimes it's just a one-off type of conversation. Also, if you're like, maybe, I don't know that I really trust that bearded guy, kind of weird, understandable. Like, my team has worked like super freaking hard to put a lot of resources on our webpage, and it's pretty awesome. Here are some of them. One is there's a 4-part online workshop series that walks through emotion regulation, wise mind skills, grounding and mindfulness, and sleep hygiene. And if all of those words sound kind of funny but interesting, then I would prompt you to go take a look, because they're really good and they will help. There's a curated list of mobile apps. It's not like we're experts in all of these apps or like have used them for years, but we've done our best to vet them through other resources that have recommended them and organizations that have recommended them, and attended to whether or not they actually provide any usefulness. And it ranges from PTSD to just sleep help, or like, I think I saw one that was like task help or just relaxations. I mean, there's all different kinds of stuff.
I think we did
We
go
also-
through them and test all of them as well. So like they're not
They're
any that are just
tested.
going to be like
Junk.
bad.
Yeah. But we haven't used them, like, it's not like we've taken each app and used it for 5 years and really said like, right, this is, yeah. But yes, right, like it's not just going to steal your credit card information. And then COVID era mental health resources are on there, and a lot of, like, right now that kind of feels like that should really be that's like kind of out of touch or out of date, because like that was like at the beginning of the pandemic, but it's not. Like, they still apply, and they're basic skills, including just creating a mental well-being plan, which was originally kind of put out there for students to utilize it when they were returning in the fall. But you can do it right now. Like, what am I missing? What do I need? What are my supports? What things are going to help me get there? What things are not going to help me get there? I mean, just walking through a structured plan that helps you understand, like, what do I need for my own benefit in this way? Super helpful if you've never done one before. Additionally, FACE COVID is an acronym that stands for something that I don't remember off the top of my head, but it's a treatment program that's based on another kind of behavioral technique that helps you to hold at the same time very different or disparate ideas, things like conflicts with values and versus context, and like this thing really sucks and infringes upon this, but I can't do anything about it, and here's what I can do, right? And helps you to kind of live in the grayness of being in a pandemic. And it's being shown to be super effective in helping people to cope or create coping strategies right now. And then there's also that self-care form that I showed you at the very beginning that had all the different domains that you rate. There's a video with Dr. Robertson that I also referenced. That video is right there in those COVID era stuff. And then also on top of that, as if that wasn't enough, $19.99 right now. It's not, it's free. You just go to it right now. Self-help library that is another curated selection of videos, and there's gobs of them, and they span all different kinds of topics, ranging from anger and managing frustrations to shame and guilt to depression and anxiety and sleep. Like there's tons of topics there. So there's plenty to explore, that all of them are going to have like great tips and tricks and recommendations and strategies and thought processes and ways to approach these different things. So by all means, make use of any and all of that as much as you can. I am done, I think, with what I had to say. But I am certainly here to answer any more questions. So if there are more questions, if you have more that you want to just throw up, whether it's related to this or other things, we're here and happy to answer those. Also, if you got what you needed, thank you. We certainly appreciate the fact that you showed up. Point your friends and those that you care about and love that may be struggling towards these resources. And this video will hopefully be on our webpage and website within about a week or so.
Michael is being a little modest because himself and Kelsey have also been doing a podcast.
Oh, thank you. You're the best, Caitlin. God,
called I believe it's called Hear Me Out.
Hear Me Out. It's fantastic.
And I don't know the platform it's on. Michael, I'm sure you
It's
do.
on
so
everything.
I'll
It's on Apple, Spotify. So it's on iTunes, Spotify. You can find it. You can just find it on the website. If you do Hear Me Out Tulsa, UTulsa Hear Me Out, I think you can, hearmeout.utulsa.edu will take you right to the page for it where everything is, and you can stream right from there. But it's on iTunes and Spotify, which is where most people go to. It's fun. It's Kelsey and I on there, also with Paris Clark and Divyani Srivastava. I got her name right. And and, and we have a lot of fun, and the entire point of the podcast is meant to just be a fun conversation that we don't often get to have, that you can just put on in the background and have with you in some of those vacant, empty spaces that we're experiencing right now. But beyond just being in the pandemic, once we get out of that, we're probably still going to do it because it's a lot of fun, and people seem to be enjoying it, and it's bringing at least some brightness. We talk about random silly stuff, so it's fun.
But we also talk about good stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it's good stuff in the silly stuff. Like that's the thing. So,
and Mary had a good question. Are we on YouTube? I don't think we are. It's just like a browser.
No.
Okay.
It's not YouTube yet because we're not doing the video record. Like we are recording the videos. I actually have all the videos, but we're not processing them at this point.
Because it'd be a lot of me doing this while y'all are talking, or just being like, I love what you're saying.
Yeah. It's not exactly produced for video content yet. So
hear me out, Brooke. That's what you would search, and then it should show like it's like probably 50 different ones. You might have to scroll a bit.
If you search Michael McClendon, it'll get, because it's under my authorship. So
get ready, because it's ridiculous, but it's also very fun. And it's like content wise, it's clean. We decided that as a podcast group as well. So if you have children or young folk who might want to listen to, they could.
Or just prefer not to hear certain types of language. It ain't there.
Exactly. So, we just don't say that.
It's just not there. Thanks for that reminder, Caitlin. Good job. I should have put that on the slide. Okay. Other questions?
I have one that is a bit unrelated. and it's self-care as well. I like Dr. Kennedy's pull over, and I was wondering if perhaps you might tell us where you found that and if it comes in other colors. Self-care.
So this is Target's finest.
Target, I think they call that.
I think so. Target. Target's finest. I bought it, I think, last year. I'm not quite sure if it still comes in any colors at this point, but it is possible. They do recycle their styles sometimes. But thank you. That's so nice of you to say. I like the stars too. That's why I got it.
So I should probably stop recording at this point then.
Probably.
Yeah, no
I
further
think
I was
questions.
thinking